Hello everyone, this is Shankar and welcome to chapter 6 of the microservices with Spring Boot tutorial. So in this chapter, we're going to take a look at distributed configuration in microservices ecosystem. And as I begin this chapter, I would assume that you have been following along and have seen all my previous chapters in this series. So if we have the configurations or if we have the properties tied to the projects that hold the business logic or that hold the business code, every time we make a change in the properties or every time we make a change in the application configurations, the project has to be restarted and the project has to be redeployed to the server. But in a production environment or in a production scenario, that is not something that we would want to do very often. So just for the sake of the new configurations getting reflected into the project, we would ideally not want to restart our server or redeploy our application every time in production. So that is a problem we are gonna try to solve with distributed configuration. So for the demo, I've already created this project called location service, and let's take a look at the dependencies for this project first. So I'm now open up POM and go to the dependencies tab. So first up we have the Spring Boot starter web. So this application is gonna act as a web application and we're gonna expose this application as an API which can be consumed via endpoints. And then we have Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka client. So this application is gonna register itself with a discovery server. And then we have Spring Boot DevTools, Spring Boot Starter Test, Spring Cloud Starter Config. So this application would register itself as a client to the configuration server, and it's going to read the configurations from a distributed configuration server or a separate server that holds the configurations for this application. And then we have Spring Boot Starter Actuator. So the actuator dependency exposes some vital endpoints for our application, and we're going to take a look in a while how we can use those endpoints for our application. So let's take a look at the classes that we have inside this project. So we have the location service application.java class. So this is the entry point that has the main method and it has the Spring Boot application annotation on top of it. And we have the location controller class. So this is a REST controller. It has a request mapping on top of it, and we also have this refresh scope. So we're going to understand what this does in a while. And inside this class we have 4 attributes, namely port, city, zip, and street, and these are going to be injected with values from a separate application file or from a separate configuration file, external configuration file. And then we have a get mapping method here. So we have a get mapping annotation on top of this method here. So this is going to expose an endpoint which can be consumed by the client, and this produces a media type of application JSON. And from this method we are just returning a new object of location class, right? Now let's take a look at the location class. So this is a plain and simple Java class, Pojo class, and it has city, zip code, street, and port inside it. So that is basically it. And apart from that, we also need to do one thing. So these values are going to be injected from a separate or from an external application file. So that application file would essentially be this file, application.properties file. So inside this we already have the name of the application as location service, and we're going to add 3 more: city, zip, and street. So I'm going to say city equals test city, zip equals 4444, and street equals XYZ street, right? I'm going to save this, and we would also need the server.port. So I'm going to set this at runtime. So I'm going to say run configurations, and I'm going to choose location service, and inside arguments tab I'm going to say server.port equals 8285. I'm gonna say run, and we're gonna use Postman to test this application, to test this API, REST API. So our application is up and running. Now let's hit the endpoint that has been exposed by the application. So we're gonna hit this endpoint and see how this works. So we have our result. We have the city as test city, zip code as 4444, street as XYZ street, and port as 8285. So this port we are setting at runtime, and these three attributes, city, zip code, and street, are being read from the application.properties file, right? Now, what if we wanted to change the value of one of these attributes? So let's suppose we want to change the value for city to ABC city instead of test city, and let's save this, and let's try to run this again. So we can see we don't have the new value reflected inside city because the application has not been restarted, and for the change to get reflected, we need the application to to restart the application, right? So let's restart the application. Let's stop this and let's restart the application. Let's say run configurations, select location service, and click on run. So if we send it again, now we have the city as ABC city because we have restarted the application. So just for a change in one of the properties, we had to restart the whole application, but that is not something that we would ideally want to do in a production environment. So to avoid that, we can use a configuration server, and both the configuration server and the API or the location service application would talk to each other using discovery server. So let's stop this application and let's take a look at our configuration server. So we have the configuration server set up here, and let's go to the POM and take a look at the dependencies for this project. So inside dependencies, we have this Spring Boot Starter Actuator, we have Spring Cloud Config Server. So this is going to make this application act as a configuration server, and we have Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka client. So this application is going to register itself with the discovery server as a client to the discovery server, and we have Spring Boot Dev Tools and Spring Boot Starter Test, and this is basically the entry point for our application, for this application, and it has this annotation enable Eureka client, so that would make this application a client to the discovery server, which is essentially the Eureka server, and we have enable config server. So this application is going to act as a configuration server, right? And inside application.properties, we have the name of the application as config server, and we would be running it on port 8888, and we also have this property called spring.cloud.config.server.git.uri. So this is a Git repository which is going to hold the configuration details or the properties for our applications. So let's take a look at this repository. So I just copy this and go to the web browser. So this is the repository called configuration store that would hold our properties file for our various APIs or for our various applications. And we can see we have the location service dev.properties file here, and we have the location service qa.properties file here. So if we go to the application.properties for our location service application, we can see the name of the application is location service, and with the same name we have created two files for different profiles. So one is for dev and another is for QA, and let's open one of them up, and we can see we have these three attributes, city, zip, and street inside this file. right? So let's go back to our workspace and start these applications up. So we're going to use the discovery server as well. So I'm going to use this application as the discovery server. So I'm going to say run as, run configurations, and I'm going to say Eureka discovery server, and let's click on run. I'm also going to run this application. So I'm going to say run as Spring Boot app. So while these applications start up, I'm just going to make a few changes. So I'm going to remove these properties from the location service file, location service application.properties file, and I'm going to start location service up as well. So let's right click, run as, run configurations, and I'll select location service arguments, and inside this arguments tab I would set another argument. So I would say -t spring dot profiles dot active equals dev, and I'm gonna say run. So if we take a look at our configuration store, we can see there are two profiles for the location service. So we have the dev profile and we have the QA profile. So we're just gonna run the dev profile, and let's go to our discovery server dashboard. So we have the config server and the location server registered with the discovery server. Now let's go to Postman and let's first try to see what is there inside our configuration server. So I'm going to use this URL. So we have our configuration server running on 8888, and the profile or the service that we are trying to look up is location service, and the profile is QA, and we want the properties to be shown in JSON format. So we have written .json. Let's send this. So we can see we have our properties being loaded from the Git repository that we have set up. So if you open up qa.properties, we can see we have the city as Pune and zip code as 1111, street as South KP Street, and that is what is being rendered here. Now let's change the profile to dev and see if it works for dev profile or not. So we can see we have the city as Kolkata, the street as Baker Street, and zip code as 1111. So let's go back to our configurations or configuration store inside our GitHub repository and take a look at the dev properties. So we have the city as Kolkata, zip as 1111, and street as Baker Street. Now let's try to load our application. So we ran this application on dev profile using the dev profile. Now we should be getting the properties that correspond to the dev profile. So we can see we have the city as Kolkata, the zip code as 1111, the street as Baker Street, and the port as 8285. Before we started the application, as an argument we had passed this port, and these three parameters or these two attributes are being read from the Git repository. I just copy this and I paste it here, and I would say actuator. So the actuator exposes some very important links or some very important endpoints that we can use. So one of them is this refresh endpoint. So what this does is it refreshes the beans that has a refresh scope annotation on top of it. So I'm going to open this up, I'm going to uncomment this, and I'm going to save this. So every time we hit this URL or we hit this endpoint slash actuator slash refresh, what it does is it reloads the bean without having to redeploy the application. So without redeploying the application, we'd get the new properties or we'd get the new configurations loaded into our beans and loaded into our projects. Now let's change this and let's save this. Let's commit the changes and let's go back to our Postman and see if the location service diff from the configuration server it has the new value or not. So it has the new value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this endpoint. So I'm going to say actuator slash refresh. So this is going to refresh the beans without us having to restart the application or redeploy the application. So we have a status of 200. Okay, now let's go back to our location service API and hit the endpoint again. So this time we have the city as Bangalore, and we did not restart our application or we did not redeploy our application. So this is what a configuration server can do, and this is how we can distribute our configurations inside a microservices ecosystem and decouple them from the projects or from the code that holds the business logic. So that is all for this chapter, and in the next chapter we're going to take a look at how we can make our services fault tolerant using historics. And hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy, please give it a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.